At exactly 12:03 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my smart home system choking on silence. The air conditioner groaned to a halt. The bedside lamp flickered once and died. Even the digital clock on my nightstand froze mid-tick like it was holding its breath. My wife rolled over, half asleep, and muttered, "Storm?" I got up and looked outside. Clear sky. No wind. But across the street, our neighbor Karen was standing in her robe and slippers, arms crossed smugly as she sipped tea under the glow of her porch light. The only house with power. That's when I realized this wasn't a blackout. It was a hit job. And Karen, our HOA president with a God complex and a Home Depot toolkit, had just declared war. What she didn't know, however, was that she hadn't just cut the line to my house. She'd cut the line to her future too. Because I don't just own this house. I own the substation that powers this entire block. I grabbed my flashlight, made my way outside, and followed the gravel path toward the utility pole at the edge of my property. A clean slice ran through the heavy-duty cable, the cut precise and intentional, not a frayed wire in sight. There was a faint scent of scorched rubber, the kind left behind by bolt cutters heated by friction. My backup generator kicked in just as I crouched down, casting a harsh light over the mutilated mess. I scanned the surroundings. No raccoon did this. No storm, no freak accident. This was sabotage. Intentional, calculated, and stupid. Especially when done to someone like me. Just 12 hours earlier, Karen had stormed up my driveway holding a clipboard and waving around some nonsense about my porch lights being off-standard and unapproved by the HOA's Lighting Harmony Committee. Yes, that's a thing. She insisted my soft amber LEDs were too warm and inviting, and that they didn't reflect the community's commitment to neutral aesthetics. I'd laughed at the time, thinking it was one of her usual empty threats. But clearly, she'd decided to follow through this time, with pliers and ego in hand. The funny part is, Karen genuinely believes she's the final authority in the neighborhood. She walks around like she's running a military base instead of a cul-de-sac. She's got laminated rulebooks in her glove compartment, portable HOA citation pads, and a megaphone she uses at block parties. It would be comical if it wasn't also deeply irritating. The woman once fined my neighbor Greg for having unruly tomatoes in his garden. Last week, she yelled at a 10-year-old for drawing a hopscotch pattern in chalk because it violated the community's symmetry. She lives for control. She thrives on it. But today, she crossed a line she never saw coming, literally and legally. I walked back into the house and checked the circuit breakers just to be sure. Everything inside was intact. My systems were all down except for the industrial-grade emergency backup I had installed a year ago. That setup was tucked away under my garage floor, hidden behind a reinforced panel that Karen didn't even know existed. It could run my house for a week straight without a blip. I powered up the security feed and rewound the footage. There she was. At exactly 11:58 p.m., Karen tiptoed across the edge of my lawn, ducked under the hedge, and reached into her oversized purse. Out came a flashlight, then bolt cutters. Her face lit up by the beam, twisted with glee like a kid on Christmas morning. I watched in silent disbelief as she leaned in and snipped the power line with the kind of satisfaction you'd expect from someone popping bubble wrap. My jaw clenched. This wasn't just a neighbor being annoying anymore. This was illegal. She'd tampered with private property, interfered with an active power line, and potentially risked a fire or electrocution. And worst of all, she did it smugly, probably thinking she was protecting the neighborhood from eyesores. She had no idea that what she really did was commit a federal offense, because those lines weren't just any old wires. They were routed directly through my privately owned energy conduit. And I had receipts. See, here's what Karen doesn't know about me. I'm not just some guy with a lawn and a smart thermostat. I'm a systems engineer and co-owner of the regional power substation that handles electricity distribution for over 1,000 homes, including Karen's. When I bought this property, I intentionally routed my home through a private control hub tied to the substation. Not because I wanted control, but because I didn't trust the HOA one bit. And now, my paranoia had paid off. I had full power logs, timestamps, even grid telemetry from when her snip triggered a data flag in the system. She thought she was cutting my lights. She actually triggered a security audit. Around 1 a.m., I got a call from my buddy Ethan, one of the lead technicians at the substation. He asked, "Hey man, your address just tripped a manual disconnect flag. You okay?" I smiled into the phone. Better than okay. Can you log the tampering as an unauthorized disruption? I've got footage. He whistled. You want me to file it officially? I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Do it. And Ethan? Flag her address too. Let's just say she's not gonna like what the next inspection uncovers. By 8 a.m., I was on my porch sipping coffee, fully powered, streaming my security footage to a USB drive for safekeeping. Karen, now dressed in her usual pastel power suit, marched up the sidewalk with her usual superiority complex radiating from every step. She stopped cold when she saw me relaxed and energized. She frowned, scanned the side of my house, then looked back at me. I see your lights are on, she said, her voice sharp. I thought you'd be down for repairs. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang just long enough to make her squirm. Then I leaned forward and said calmly, "Yeah, backup kicked in immediately. You know, it's a good thing the substation didn't read that as a threat. It's owned by some real sticklers when it comes to line tampering." Her eyes narrowed slightly. I could tell she didn't quite follow. Yet. "I'll be filing a complaint," she snapped, attempting to regain her composure. "Your system is disruptive to neighborhood harmony." I nodded. "You should definitely file that. While you're at it, maybe check your own meter box. I think someone's been using non-approved tap extensions. Wouldn't want the city inspector to find those during an audit, right?" Her expression faltered for the briefest second. A flicker of fear. Then back to anger. She spun around and stomped away, muttering something about power abusers. As she disappeared behind her hedges, I pulled out my phone and opened the substation's control app. I tapped into the residential monitoring system. Karen's address flashed red. Pending audit. Grid inspection scheduled. Flagged for suspicious rerouting. All of it logged, time-stamped, and submitted. She thought she'd turned off my world. But all she did was power up a storm. And this time, she wasn't in control. I was. And the grid was about to shock her back into reality. By the time the sun had fully risen the next morning, the neighborhood group chat was already buzzing. "Why did Karen's sprinkler system go haywire at 3 a.m.? One message read. "Anyone else get a weird flicker in their lights last night?" said another. I watched from my living room window, coffee in hand, as Karen strutted down the sidewalk with her HOA clipboard, acting like nothing had happened. But I knew something she didn't. The inspection protocols had already been activated. The substation's alert system flagged her house for unauthorized interference, and a temporary disruption notice had been issued. Her power was still on, but the audit was coming. Fast. And it wasn't going to be some slap-on-the-wrist walkthrough. It was going to be a deep-dive forensic review of every inch of her wiring. I spent most of the morning compiling everything. I pulled the surveillance footage from multiple angles, including the backyard motion camera that caught her silhouette sneaking past my garden gate. I printed off time-stamped energy logs from the substation's internal monitoring system and highlighted the spike that occurred when she cut the line. It was an exact match. I even printed the HOA violation letter she taped to my door the day before, citing me for illuminative noncompliance. The phrase itself was ridiculous, but paired with her sabotage, it painted a perfect picture of motive. She didn't like my porch lights, so she took it upon herself to enforce her made-up rules with wire cutters and a warped sense of justice. Midday, I drove down to City Hall and visited the records office. I requested a property boundary confirmation and a public copy of the HOA's charter, just in case Karen tried to twist any language during her inevitable tantrum. While I was there, I bumped into Vince, a friend from high school who now worked with the city's Utilities Commission. He glanced at my request paperwork and raised an eyebrow. "Karen again?" he asked, half amused, half exasperated. I nodded. "She cut my power line. I've got footage, logs, and she filed a fake compliance form to justify it." Vince shook his head. "She never learns. Let me run this by my supervisor. If there's an active tampering incident, we might be able to flag her system before the inspection even hits. Makes the case stronger." Back home, I double-checked the wiring system. Everything was functioning normally thanks to the backup, but I noticed something new. My neighbor 2 doors down, Mrs. Castillo, had a city vehicle parked in front of her house. I walked over casually and asked if everything was all right. She leaned in and whispered, "Karen sent a notice saying she reported my air conditioning unit for being visually disruptive from the street view. She wants it moved behind a hedge." I blinked. "It's your AC unit. On your property." She nodded. "Exactly. But she's saying it violates visual harmony." That was the second neighbor in 24 hours being harassed. Karen wasn't just targeting me. She was building a pattern. I returned to my place and printed out copies of the footage for physical backup. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was preparing for escalation. And it came sooner than expected. At 4 p.m., a bright yellow SUV with HOA Compliance Patrol decals rolled up to my driveway. Out stepped Karen, of course, flanked by 2 of her yes-men, Larry, a retired dentist with too much free time, and Bev, a former office manager who spoke in passive-aggressive shriek. All 3 of them wore matching neon vests and carried clipboards like it was some kind of hazmat operation. Karen walked up to the edge of my driveway and clapped once. "We're here for the inspection," she announced like a reality show villain. I stepped outside calmly, arms folded. "You're not allowed on my property without a court order or official inspection permit. Neither of which you have." Karen's eyes narrowed. "According to HOA regulations, Section 7.3b, we have the right to inspect suspected energy hazards." I smiled. Actually, that section was invalidated in the last charter revision. And even if it weren't, you're still bound by state law, which trumps HOA fantasy. Larry tried to say something, but Bev interrupted with, "We're just trying to maintain safety and uniformity, sir." I pointed at my security camera. "Say that again for the recording." Karen's face twitched. She realized she was being filmed again. She muttered something about non-cooperation and stormed off with her lackeys trailing behind her like confused mall cops. The HOA SUV screeched as it reversed out of my driveway. 10 minutes later, the police showed up. No sirens, just a cruiser casually pulling in. The officer stepped out and I recognized him immediately, Officer Patel. He and I had worked together on an energy security initiative last year, updating substation protocols to block cyberattacks. He looked at me and said, "She called it in as utility fraud. Said you were illegally rerouting power." I couldn't help but laugh. "Come on inside," I said. "I'll show you the entire setup." 5 minutes later, we were standing in my basement, looking at the secured relay station connected to the substation's private grid. Officer Patel whistled. She really didn't know who she was messing with. I handed him a folder with all the evidence, video, logs, statements. He flipped through it and nodded. "This is clean. Actually, it's airtight." Before he left, I asked if she'd face any consequences. "For now," he said, "we're logging this as unlawful interference with a utility connection. That's already a crime. But since it's linked to your substation, the utility board might escalate it federally. And if she keeps filing false reports, she's racking up perjury too." I thanked him and walked him out just in time to see Karen peeking through her curtains, phone in hand. The look on her face when he waved goodbye to me was priceless. Later that night, I got a text from Ethan. "Update. Audit set for tomorrow afternoon. Karen's address flagged. Want to watch the fun in person? I replied with one word, absolutely. But before I turned in for the night, I uploaded every single file to the cloud. Then I made a backup on a USB drive. Then another. One copy went into my safe. One went into my glove box. I knew Karen wasn't done yet. She was the type who only doubled down when cornered. And something told me she was going to try one more big move before the inspection landed on her doorstep. Sure enough, around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a motion alert. I opened the camera feed and saw Karen walking across her lawn with a box under one arm and a flashlight in her teeth. She walked straight to her meter box, crouched down, and opened it. I zoomed in. She was installing something. A homemade energy regulator, maybe? A bypass device? Whatever it was, it looked like it had wires sticking out at wild angles. She paused, looked around, and then screwed the panel shut before hurrying back inside. I shook my head, already knowing that her little late-night stunt was going to be the final nail in her coffin. She didn't just cut the line anymore. She was digging herself a hole she couldn't crawl out of. And tomorrow, when the inspectors arrived, they weren't just going to see a line cutter. They were going to see a full-blown, delusional vigilante with a personal vendetta, and all the evidence in the world to prove it. Karen thought she had the upper hand, but by the time the grid inspection team stepped onto her porch, she'd learned the hard way. Never. The next day, the neighborhood felt unusually still, like the hush before a thunderclap. Birds chirped, kids pedaled quietly down the sidewalks, and yet everyone's eyes kept drifting toward one house, Karen's. Her pristine lawn, trimmed with military precision, looked even more artificial under the midday sun. But the real show wasn't out front. It was happening inside, where Karen paced like a cornered cat, frantically tapping her phone, trying to delay what was coming. The utility inspection crew was already in the neighborhood, a marked van parked just around the corner with 2 inspectors inside reviewing blueprints. Ethan had texted me at 10:15 a.m. sharp. They're here. She's on the list. This is going to be good. I had a perfect view from my upstairs window. With binoculars, I could see Karen watching the van too. She knew. She absolutely knew. Her paranoia wasn't unwarranted. And it was about to combust. At precisely 10:42, the inspection crew, both in navy polos with embroidered regional utility logos, walked toward Karen's front walk. She came out before they even reached the step. She smiled, overly wide, like she was welcoming royalty. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language told the whole story. She was trying to steer them away. They were professional but firm. One pointed to a clipboard. She stiffened. One of them motioned toward her side panel. That's when she lost it. She started waving her arms like windmills, clearly objecting, clearly trying to delay them. The inspectors didn't flinch. They pulled out a small toolkit and radioed their dispatch. One nodded at the other, and they proceeded past her, toward the side of the house where I'd seen her tampering the night before. Karen followed them, still protesting. But her face changed when they opened the box. I saw her freeze. One of the inspectors leaned closer, adjusted his safety gloves, and carefully removed a strange-looking device, exactly what I had seen her install. It looked like a clumsy homemade voltage regulator or a signal booster gone wrong, wires splayed like tangled spaghetti and duct tape binding the core. I didn't have to guess what happened next. Within minutes, a second van arrived, this one unmarked, but I recognized it from my time at the substation. It belonged to the Energy Compliance Office. Now Karen was dealing with the big leagues. These weren't just code inspectors. These were the folks responsible for federal energy violations, and they weren't here for suggestions. They were here for documentation and evidence collection. I saw them lay out small orange flags around her meter box and take high-resolution photos. One of them pulled out a tablet, and I knew they were uploading everything directly to the city and utility commission servers. By this time, Karen had gone from denial to bargaining. She was no longer yelling. Now she was pleading, gesturing toward the device as if to say, "It's nothing. Just a minor thing." But it didn't matter. The damage was already done, and I knew from experience they didn't come to a residential site with that level of equipment unless it was serious. I walked downstairs, brewed myself a fresh cup of coffee, and casually strolled to the sidewalk. A few other neighbors were already standing around, doing the same thing, pretending to check their mail, water plants, or just taking their dogs out at the most convenient hour possible. Mrs. Castillo walked over and whispered, "Is it true? Did they find something illegal?" I nodded. She installed an unlicensed voltage bypass. If it surged, it could have set the entire wall on fire. And it was probably drawing power from the wrong conduit. Mrs. Castillo looked horrified. She's been accusing everyone else of violations for years. And all this time she was the one breaking the law. I gave her a knowing look. The loudest ones usually are. By noon, Karen's facade had crumbled. She sat on her front porch chair, red-faced and shaking, talking rapidly into her phone. Probably trying to reach the HOA attorney, if they even had one. A few minutes later, a third vehicle pulled up. This one had a small city seal and a clipboard-wielding man in a button-down shirt. Property code enforcement. I nearly choked on my coffee from laughing. The inspectors had likely flagged her for property code violations too, given the DIY setup she'd rigged. From where I stood, I could see the man inspecting her fuse box, her backyard conduit, and even her sprinkler control system. He looked more annoyed by the minute. And just when it seemed like the day couldn't get worse for her, Karen noticed me standing on the sidewalk, hands in pockets, watching the whole scene unfold. Her eyes locked onto mine, burning with rage and disbelief. She stood up and stomped across the lawn. "You did this," she hissed, teeth clenched. "You set me up. This is harassment. You're conspiring with the inspectors." I raised an eyebrow. "You cut my power line. On camera. You installed an illegal bypass. On camera. You filed a false complaint. Documented. I didn't set you up, Karen. You walked into this with your eyes wide open." She sputtered, looked around, realizing that half the neighborhood was watching now. Some were filming. Others just stood still, like they were witnessing the climax of a drama they had been watching for far too long. Karen's anger began to falter, replaced by something worse, embarrassment. Her pride, so tightly stitched together by years of HOA tyranny, was unraveling in public view. "I was protecting the community," she finally muttered, voice cracking. "Someone had to maintain order." I nodded. "And now the real authorities are maintaining it." Just then, one of the energy compliance officers approached her with a printed citation in hand. I couldn't hear the details, but I could see the headline in bold lettering: "Violation of Utility Code 14.12a, Tampering with Live Infrastructure." That wasn't a fine. That was a pending legal action. Karen took the paper like it was radioactive. She turned and trudged back to her porch, shoulders slumped, all HOA confidence drained from her face. Later that evening, the HOA message board lit up. An anonymous post, probably Larry or Bev, explained that the board would hold an emergency meeting to review recent events and reconsider current leadership. Translation: Karen was being thrown under the bus, and they were already distancing themselves from her mess. One member even posted, "We should have known when she fined me for having hummingbird feeders." Another replied, "She threatened to call animal control on my cat for walking on her lawn." The thread became a full-blown roast session. By nightfall, her porch lights were off. Her curtains stayed shut. She didn't even come out to collect her mail. And the most ironic twist of all? Her house had been temporarily disconnected from the grid for safety review, meaning she'd be in the dark until a certified technician reapproved her entire setup. She cut my power. And now, she was the one fumbling for candles. I sat on my porch, sipped my tea, and watched the stars blink on above the neighborhood. Everything was peaceful again. But this wasn't over. Not yet. The investigation was just beginning, and Karen didn't know the half of what was coming. Her tampering had triggered more than an inspection. It had tripped legal wires connected to my substation's federal oversight. And oh. The following morning, I expected quiet. Instead, my phone lit up before I'd even had my first sip of coffee. Karen had filed a lawsuit. Not just a complaint, not a cease and desist. An actual lawsuit, complete with dramatic language accusing me of emotional trauma, electrical sabotage, and psychological warfare through malicious power manipulation. It read like a script from a bad courtroom drama. She claimed I had created an unsafe power system that endangered the neighborhood and intentionally humiliated her by alerting the authorities. She even said I hacked her sprinkler system as retaliation. I nearly spit out my drink laughing. The only thing I'd hacked was the patience not to press charges earlier. I wasn't entirely surprised. Karen had never been one to take accountability. She treated every challenge like a personal attack, every disagreement like a court case. But this time, she had escalated beyond HOA pettiness into real legal territory, and I knew something she didn't. By filing this lawsuit, she had opened the door to discovery. That meant every message, every surveillance clip, every inspection report was now admissible evidence. And unlike her, I had receipts. All of them. My lawyer, Marissa, was calm as ever when I forwarded her the complaint. She responded with a single line. Let her dig her own grave, we'll bring the shovel. We countered immediately, not just with a motion to dismiss, but with a cross-claim for damages caused by her utility tampering, including repair costs, violation of private property, and interference with critical infrastructure. I attached the video clips, utility records, and the inspection reports. Marissa added a copy of the Regional Energy Compliance Letter that classified Karen's device as an unauthorized, non-permitted energy bypass with fire hazard potential. Then she submitted everything to the court. By the time Karen received the response, it must have landed like a bomb. She'd expected me to panic, to fold, maybe even offer a settlement. Instead, she was hit with evidence so overwhelming, so professionally documented, that her bluff had become a disaster. Still, she showed up at the HOA office the next day wearing oversized sunglasses and a dramatic black scarf like she was attending a funeral. The community center, usually reserved for bake sales and holiday parties, had been reserved for a so-called HOA emergency session to defend property rights. Except this time, the seats weren't filled with eager rule followers. The room was tense, half the neighborhood in attendance. People weren't there to support her. They were there to see how deep this would go. Karen stood at the front, attempting to rally her loyal few. She ranted about power abuse, dangerous neighbors, and a growing culture of anarchy. She called me out by name, accusing me of waging an energy war against the HOA. But the mood shifted fast when Greg, one of the quieter neighbors, raised his hand and asked a question that shattered the illusion. Karen, didn't you climb onto Dave's property and cut the power line with bolt cutters? The room went dead silent. Karen froze. That was a misunderstanding, she muttered. It was a safety measure. Then Bev, one of her usual allies, spoke up. You said the inspectors were part of a smear campaign. But my brother works for the city. He confirmed everything they cited you for. That wasn't sabotage. That was enforcement. Then it all crumbled. People started talking. Louder. One neighbor mentioned Karen had fined her for hanging a holiday wreath before the designated date. Another complained about a citation for having a loud wind chime. Someone else revealed Karen once threatened to remove their mailbox for being too whimsical. It became a public reckoning, the kind you can't walk back from. Karen tried to shout over them, her voice cracking as she banged her gavel. Yes, she actually brought a gavel, but the sound was swallowed by a crowd no longer willing to be intimidated. The final blow came when one of the newer residents, a retired federal prosecutor named Henry, stood up and calmly said, For what it's worth, if any of you get subpoenaed for this civil case, you're allowed to share your experiences. Just be honest. The court will appreciate transparency." Karen's face collapsed. All her power, all her years of micromanaging, vanished in a minute. She fled the room, not saying another word. The HOA meeting dissolved into hushed conversation and shaking heads. Nobody followed her. Nobody defended her. It was over. At least in that building. But outside, things were just beginning. A week later, we were in court. A modest county courtroom, but the stakes felt massive. Karen's lawyer, a man who looked like he'd been hired off a discount billboard, tried his best to paint me as a dangerous tech overlord who manipulated the energy system to mentally torment his neighbor. He showed edited screenshots of my security feed, trying to make my backup system look illegal. But the judge wasn't buying it. Especially when Marissa laid out our case, methodically, piece by piece. She played the unedited footage of Karen cutting the wire. She showed the inspection report. She pulled out the forensic photos of the illegal bypass device. Then, for good measure, she read aloud one of Karen's handwritten HOA violation notices about my intimidating garden gnome. The judge actually chuckled. But humor aside, the court took it seriously. Karen's actions were classified as utility tampering and trespassing. The judge dismissed her suit entirely and ordered her to pay my legal fees. Then, in an unexpected twist, the court referred her case to the county prosecutor's office for potential charges related to infrastructure interference, given my substation ownership. That wasn't just bad. That was potentially criminal. Karen stood up, tried to protest, but the judge shut her down. "You tampered with an active power system. You lied to officers. You escalated a civil issue into a public safety concern. That's not community leadership. That's reckless." She left the courtroom shaking, her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck like it was the only thing holding her together. Outside, a small group of local reporters snapped photos. Apparently, news had spread about the HOA president versus substation owner feud. One headline later read, "Neighborhood tyrant faces power outage of her own making." Back home, things began to normalize. The HOA board voted to strip Karen of her position. Her nameplate was removed from the front office. Her newsletter access was revoked. And within days, an email went out announcing a new interim president, Mr. Thompson, a retired firefighter known for minding his own business and barbecuing for the block. A wave of relief swept through the neighborhood. But Karen wasn't quite done. A few days after the court ruling, I noticed a for sale sign on her lawn. Not just a little discreet one either. A massive, bright red sign that screamed urgency. Rumor had it she was trying to move out before any criminal charges were filed. And that wasn't all. Her lawn, once pristine, began to overgrow. Packages piled up on her porch, untouched. It was like she vanished inside her own house. No more patrols. No more citation note. Just a woman who lost everything she built her identity around and realized, too late, that the power she craved had never been hers to begin with. As for me, I went back to my routines. Morning coffee. Worky. It had been a few weeks since Karen's dramatic courtroom defeat and her abrupt fall from the self-appointed throne of the HOA. The neighborhood had begun to breathe easier. Gone were the passive-aggressive flyers shoved under doors, the early morning citations taped to mailboxes, and the surveillance photos slipped into people's HOA violation packet. The air felt lighter. Kids were playing outside again without being scolded for riding scooters past aesthetic fences, and people were once again decorating their porches without fear of a warning about unapproved seasonal color palettes. But while the neighborhood was healing, I knew there was still one final thread dangling in the unraveling mess Karen had made, her pending charges. The county had taken its sweet time, but when it finally moved, it moved decisively. I received a call from Vince at the Utilities Commission. He didn't sound surprised when he said, "Hey, just a heads up. Karen's officially being charged with tampering with critical infrastructure. She's not looking at hard time, But this isn't just a slap on the wrist. She'll be lucky if it's probation and community service. I thanked him and asked if the substation audit had finalized. He confirmed it had, and that the illegal bypass device Karen installed had not only posed a risk to her own property but could have surged power fluctuations across a dozen homes if it malfunctioned during peak hours. It wasn't just an eyesore. It was a dangerous, unstable setup, and Karen had installed it thinking she was the hero. Word spread quickly, of course. No matter how much Karen tried to keep a low profile, it was impossible to ignore the subtle but steady flow of consequences closing in on her. The inspection vehicles returned one last time to verify her complete disconnection from any unauthorized systems, and she was slapped with a mandatory repair bill that reached almost $15,000. When the notice was posted on her front door, it flapped in the breeze like a flag of surrender. Neighbors took photos. Some even posted anonymously online, sharing updates under titles like, "Tyrant of Tranquil Pines gets her bill," and "HOA Karen's power trip ends in the dark." I hadn't seen her step outside in over a week. Her once perfect lawn was now patchy and dry, the automatic sprinkler system long disabled during the inspection. The mail overflowed in her box. One of her window shutters had started to hang crooked. The decay wasn't physical so much as symbolic. Her reign had crumbled, and with it, her carefully curated image. And then came the moving truck. It rolled up on a cloudy Thursday morning, dull gray with no markings, as if she was trying to slip away without anyone noticing. But people noticed. We always do when the loudest voice in the neighborhood goes quiet. A few men in uniforms began hauling furniture out, impeccably arranged shelves, boxed up HOA binders, and even the infamous gavel in a velvet case. I watched from my porch, sipping tea, as they carefully loaded up her legacy into the back of the truck. Karen came out once, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She didn't speak to anyone. She just stood there directing the movers with stiff gestures and a hollow gaze. There was no one there to wave goodbye, no neighbors offering sympathy. Just silence. Later that day, as the truck pulled away and Karen climbed into the passenger seat of a sedan driven by someone I didn't recognize, I walked across the street to take one last look at the house she had once ruled like a fortress. A few neighbors joined me. Greg, Mrs. Castillo, even Bev, who had switched sides quietly after the courtroom embarrassment. We stood there for a minute before Greg finally said, "So, who wants to tell the new HOA president he can finally approve that barbecue pit?" Laughter rippled through the group. It was the kind of laugh you don't realize you've been holding in until it bursts free. Light, human, real. That night, the neighborhood held its first real block party in years. Thompson, the new interim president, rolled out a smoker the size of a canoe. Someone brought a sound system. Kids played tag under string lights, and nobody mentioned permit. I brought out my projector and played a movie on the side of my garage. No citations appeared. No noise complaints. Just life. People came up to me throughout the evening, offering thanks or kind words. One woman said, "I used to dread living here. Now it feels like home again." A man I'd never spoken to before clapped me on the back and added, "I heard what she tried to do to your wiring. That was insane. You handled it like a champ." I just nodded and smiled. What could I say? It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring sanity to a place that had forgotten how to coexist. By the end of the night, the street glowed with laughter and conversation. Fireflies danced around the garden lights that Karen had once tried to ban. The air smelled like grilled corn and freedom. And as I stood there watching it all, I thought back to that night, the moment everything went dark. That quiet second when I realized my power wasn't just off, it had been taken. I remember thinking I had to stay calm, to handle it methodically, to let her trip over her own arrogance. And now, standing there surrounded by warmth and noise and peace, I realized just how deeply that moment had reshaped our street. Weeks turned into months. Karen's house eventually sold. A young couple moved in, friendly, quiet, respectful. They planted fresh flowers where Karen's rulebooks once stood. The mailbox, which she once demanded be regulation gray, was now painted a cheerful blue. No one objected. Nobody dared. Because now the neighborhood had something stronger than rules. It had memory. As for me, I kept the footage. Not out of spite, but as a reminder that sometimes the worst situations reveal the strongest truth. That power, real power, comes not from control but from composure. That letting someone else dig their own grave is more effective than swinging the shovel yourself. And maybe most of all, that when someone tries to cut you off, the best revenge isn't flipping the breaker, it's watching the lights come back on everywhere else while they sit in the dark. And maybe, just maybe, I added a small new feature to my smart system. A motion sensor along the edge of my lawn, programmed to play a short sound clip if anyone approaches the wiring box. Not an alarm. Not a warning. Just a little recording of Karen, mid-HOA meeting, saying in her crisp, superior voice, "As president of this community, I am the law." It plays on loop. Only loud enough to be heard when you're standing too close. Most people walk away laughing. But every once in a while, I like to sit on the porch, lean back in my chair, and sip my tea as I hear it echo across the grass. A gentle little reminder that some people will always reach for power. And sometimes the only thing stronger than flipping the switch is knowing exactly when not to.